Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's time for part 2 of our season review of Newcastle's 2023-2024 campaign. If you've listened to part 1, it ended with that Boxing Day defeat to Nottingham Forest up at St James's Park. Me and John are back to carry on to the end of the season. John, how are we doing? You well?
Yes, I'm good. And as we know how the season panned out, I'm not too depressed.
Yeah, there's no surprises to come. It's just more of a reflection and a question of what may have been, because there are
Yeah,
plenty of moments in the second half of the season. We're going to go from January until the end of the season, which is middle of May. Plenty of moments, plenty of results in which you do perhaps sit there and think what might have been. I'll mention it again, that good old Everton draw at St James's Park when Paul Dummett decided he was going to rock bottom the Everton player to the floor is one of those that springs to mind, and we will get to that. But we've got to start with the other side of Merseyside first off, John, because the first game of 2024 was against Liverpool down at Anfield. They were beaten 4-2 with Newcastle United. They had 9 first-team players missing, which gives a little bit of context to the result, to the performance. But from my memory, it wasn't like they were embarrassed. It was just kind of expected, I guess.
yes, I think it was. We ended the year with a defeat. We started the year with another defeat. 9 players out, dropped to ninth in the table as a consequence of that defeat. This one, I think, as you said, Andrew, I think more or less expected. The defeat by Liverpool, which we touched on last time at St James's Park, totally unexpected because, as we mentioned, 1-0 up with 10 minutes to go against 10 men, and we lose. This was the completion of the double. This one was expected. Liverpool were going well in the season and went well right up to the death. So this one, it was expected. The other one left the bitterness in the mouth. But I do get sick of the Liverpool results because they happen far too often and often controversially, although this one basically wasn't. But my spirits were to be lifted because we weren't too far away from a very good result.
It was a performance by Martin Dubravka, which I think you can describe as heroic. Liverpool really peppered Newcastle's goal. There was a penalty save in there as well from Mo Salah. And, it took Liverpool until I think it was the 49th minute, John, to actually get the opener. And Newcastle got it back to 3-2. So while on paper 4-2 looks like a bit of a thumping and a bit of a thrashing, and I guess you could argue, given the saves Dubravka had to make, it would have been, other than the goalkeeper putting a top performance. But the fact that Newcastle were missing so many key players, and they did push Liverpool despite what the results and the shot stats might suggest.
That was probably Dubrovka's best display for us from when he became a regular back in the side after Nick Pope, um, because he had a few games that weren't quite so clever. Um, so that was probably his moment in the sun, even though it doesn't look like it again on paper with him letting 4 goals in. Um, but as I say, no major shocks. Yes, we'll give it a go. Without the goalkeeper, it could have been savage. But as I said, what was to come immediately afterwards lifted my spirits, and I think a lot of Geordie's spirits.
Yeah, certainly so. I mean, Liverpool had 18 shots in that game, and Newcastle really did have Martin Dubravka to thank for keeping the score at just 4 goals to Liverpool. But yes, John, as you mentioned, next up was the Wear Tyne derby against Sunderland at the Stadium of Light. And I mean, the excitement, is it excitement? I mean, for me, it was excitement, but I appreciate that I'm in the minority because for a lot of people, it's just nerves. But I love the build up to the derby because for me, it is excitement. It's about beating your closest rivals. I don't really feel the nerves. I just get really excited at the prospect of it. I don't know about you. How were you in the
Well,
build up?
it was slightly different to normal. I welcomed the opportunity to play them. Um, the nerves were simply because our recent record in Tyne-Wear derbies was horrendous, where we hadn't won since Boadicea was charging around this country on a chariot, it seemed. And therefore the nerves were, all we need is to go into their territory and lose yet again when they're playing a division down, and that will be everything we need. But as Kevin Keegan once said, love it, love it. We did love it because we went there and it was quite comprehensive and it looked exactly what it was: Premier League against Championship. 3-0, own goal in Isaac 2. It was very, very comfortable. And the class gap, I felt, was enormous.
It certainly was, and it was Newcastle's first win over the Black Cats since 2011. Obviously, you have to chuck in the fact that they've been a division or two below Newcastle for large parts of that. And it was a fantastic performance from Newcastle. The players certainly didn't show any nerve at all and just stamped their authority on the game. And it was a really important win. I mean, the bragging rights aside, John, Newcastle came into this game in a sequence of 7 defeats in their past 8. So it was really important for Eddie Howe and the players that they won this, no matter who the opposition was against. Obviously, it was a little bit more important given it was against your nearest rivals in the first derby since 2016 or whatever it was. But just to stop the rut, just to stop the poor form that they were in, dumped out of the Champions League, out of the League Cup, and the league form was dire as well. Really important victory, just like I said, just to stop the bad form.
And of course, you rightly say, because of who were playing, if the bad form had continued, i.e., we'd lost, it wouldn't have been just another defeat. It would have been a defeat at Sunderland against a team from a division down. So that wasn't even worth contemplating. And that's, I think, where the nerves come into it. And if I remember the build-up, while there was excitement with people like yourself and a few others, there was a colossal amount of nerves because it was just, what if? This is a match we need like a hole in the head, because if it doesn't go right, oh dear me, and if it does go right, well, so it should, because they're division down. So there was a lot riding on the game from our point of view, but I thought from kickoff right to the end, there was absolutely no doubt who was bossing the game and who was going to win the game. And I mean, if you could be disappointed in Sunderland, and I don't think many Geordies could be disappointed in Sunderland, they look woeful. And what I was going to find interesting was their alleged superstar, this lad Clark, who has been touted as Premier League class and how much it's just a matter of how much money they're going to get for him. And he had this big pedigree, having come from Leeds via Spurs, I think it was. And I was intrigued to watch him play against us, because is he going to be Premier League class again? Is he worth the step up? Is he the danger that could, expose us in any different way? He never got a kick.
No, neither did Bellingham either. I was really disappointed with Bellingham because I was quite looking forward to seeing how he went up against the likes of Bruno and Joelinton, but he was just non-existent. And obviously, he's always going to be held up and compared to his brother at Real Madrid. But I mean, he was.
I mean, I honestly think he's a kid that just happens to have the right surname. He's relatively talented, but and he's young. He'll develop, but he's probably at the level he should be at. Clark was being touted as a genuine Premier League star who had shown it at Leeds, got him a big transfer to Spurs, hadn't quite worked out. Who should be interested in him in the Premier League? West Ham were getting touted. There was the odd suggestion that even we should be interested, etc. And I thought, this guy could be a danger to us. Let's see if he's as good as his reputation is. And he didn't sell himself on the day at all. We didn't allow him to, but he didn't sell himself on the day at all. And the class gap was exactly that.
And there was my favourite moment of that game was watching Luke O'Nien. I mean, he charged around and he wiped out Lewis Miley and celebrated like it was a goal. And it was a proper coward's challenge. I mean, there's a reason he didn't go up against a Bruno or Trippier, because he knew that he'd be getting a little shove back. But he decided that it was okay to go up against a 17-year-old lad. And he tried it again on Alexander Isak, and he just got sold so well. And he ended up on his backside, and Isak went away with the ball But that was a favourable moment watching him get a little bit embarrassed. I also love the fact that Sean Longstaff went over to O'Nien after that challenge on Miley and said, you want to pick on someone a little bit more experienced and see what happens. And Longstaff had Miley's back, which was great. Great to see Miley get back up, actually, and not roll around, not get overawed by it. I thought he handled himself really well when he came off the bench. And it was just, given the form Newcastle were in, John, when they came into it, it was just a very united performance. The players definitely understood what it meant to the fans and to the city and to the region, because that was the fear. The mood wasn't great coming into the game. Would that distract them? Would some of the players really understand what this game means to them, to the club? And to be fair to them, every single one of them did, and every single one of them put on a really good performance.
I think Carl went about making certain that the players did know what was riding on this, and he used the local lads, didn't he, like Longstaff and Dummett, to get the message home completely, so that none of the lads like Bruno and Joelinton and people that had come from abroad who mightn't quite know what was riding on this, because they didn't have this as a regular derby match. Sunderland had been in League One and then the Championship. What they knew what was riding on it, and also what results had been happening before Sunderland disappeared down the plug hole, 2 divisions. The results had gone Sunderland's way, so it was very, very important that they were smacked and put back in the box, and they were on the day, and that was terrific. It was the FA Cup, which is a competition we wanted to do well in because we have a history in the FA Cup, but it's way back. We haven't done well in the FA Cup since, and if you remember when Eddie first came here and Trippier first came here, we played, was it Cambridge United at home?
It was
one of the very first matches, and got tucked up. So our FA Cup history under Howe had not been good. I think we lost the next season as well. So at the first hurdle. So this was the first hurdle this season. So we needed a result for all those reasons. And we got it. And we got it quite comprehensively. 3-0 didn't flatter in any way whatsoever.
Yeah, they'd lost Sheffield Wednesday the year before in what was an embarrassment to Newcastle. So that was the other thing coming in this game. Their form in the FA Cup wasn't great. So that was another element to it. But as you said, no bother at all. There was a downside to it, though. Joelinton picked up an injury in that game and didn't return. No, he did. Did he return? I'm trying, because there was one stage of the season where he returned and then came off straight away. But anyway, he picked up that injury and then he went. So yeah, that must have been before that. So he did pick up the injury against Sunderland, and then he went under the knife, and he didn't reappear until the last couple of weeks of the season. I mean, what can we say, John? I mean, we've said it enough times in recent months, but what a huge blow that was to lose Joelinton.
Well, we just suffered because towards the end of the last review we did, we just suffered Nick Pope, and it was followed by Joelinton. And I can't think, if all the injuries we had, and we've had enough this season, believe you me. I mean, 9 cats we must have run over 29. But the 2 biggest I felt in terms of the damage it did to the team, because of the length of time and because of how important these guys were Nick Pope and Joelinton. And we just lost Nick Pope, and here we were losing Joelinton, and both resurfaced only right at the death of the season there. And so we're missing for an eternity, and big time missing. We missed both of them hugely, and that had a huge impact on what happened to us this season, as did the Tonali 10-month ban.
How important is it, John, that Newcastle have managed to get him signed to a new contract, Joelinton?
Essential, absolutely essential, because there was talk that if he didn't get the contract he wanted, he was ready to take to his toes, because he obviously had become a full Brazilian international. He had been, if not a joke, he had been lightweight as a centre forward when he first come here, took an awful lot of stick, had the courage and the guts to reinvent himself when he moved into midfield, to become an absolute beast, having been a jelly baby as a centre forward, an absolute beast, and had become so much important to us. We had to put down the marker that we keep our best players because there were people watching, not least Bruno, his best mate, who is wanted by everybody, not least Anthony Gordon, who's suddenly becoming the player we hoped he would be, and by Jove, didn't he, in this particular season? So all these people are looking. If you allow Joelinton to walk away, albeit you get a good fee, but nonetheless, the rest of the dressing room aren't concerned about the fee. They're only concerned about there is a very, very good player let out of the door when we need more good players in, not some of them out. And that was a statement of intent. And hopefully that statement of intent will continue this summer when any approaches for Isaac or Anthony Gordon or Bruno are dispelled and pushed out of the back and we bring in more quality. That was the first statement to the dressing room that we're serious about this rebuilding. We're no longer the selling club Newcastle were donkeys years ago when in the blink of an eye they sold Waddle, Beardsley and Gaza and got relegated. And this was a very, very good statement of intent from the owners and from the manager that we are going to be serious contenders. And look, we've got one of the best players who was on the verge of being able to leave, willing to sign and stay with us. And I think that's reassured Bruno, without a shadow of doubt, and other people that are looking at the situation.
Totally agree with you. He signed that new deal in April after plenty of speculation, and I said at the time that it was much more than him just signing a new contract. It was everything you've just said there, John. It was a message to the big stars here. If you work hard, you'll get rewarded. It was a message to potential rivals. We keep our best players. It was a message to the fans. We keep our best players. So it was much more than him just putting pen to paper.
And we're trying to do it again, Andrew, with Isaac.
Yeah.
Who will probably this summer get a new improved contract, which reflects the fact that he's now a 25-goal centre forward at Newcastle. Stay with us and your contracts will be voluntarily improved, significantly improved, and we are taking steps forward and you will be able to fulfill your dreams with us and not have to go somewhere else to fill your dreams. That was the message to Joelinton. It's a message to Isaac. It's the reason why Bruno signed a new contract. You can get your dreams here and the Geordies can fulfill their dreams at the same time. The days gone where you had to go like Beardsley went to Liverpool and Waddle and Gaza went to Spurs, the days when you had to do that are long gone.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Next up was Man City at home, and Newcastle took a 2-0 lead into this game and ended up losing it
2-1, I think, wasn't it?
2-1. So yeah, it was because obviously they scored a very early goal, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. And we got 2 in 2 minutes to Isaac and Gordon to lead 2-1 at half time. And then De Bruyne come on and turned the game completely.
I was going to say your memory's better than mine. I just caught up there. Bernardo Silva put City ahead in the 26th minute from a Kyle Walker cross before Alexander Isak scored and Anthony Gordon got the second.
Scored, yeah. 2 in 2 minutes, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then as you say, Mr. Kevin De Bruyne came off the bench and changed the game. And I think what stands out about this result, John, is that having watched Manchester City lift the Premier League title on the final day of the season, the amount of references in the commentary before the final whistle on the final day of the season about this game, the players who were then being interviewed after the game with the medals around their neck being asked by Jamie Redknapp and Michael Richards about the importance of this game. You know, was this a turning point in your season? That was asked several times of Man City's stars. It shows you really what an important result it was for Manchester City. And I guess you can look at that and say, you know, how close Newcastle United were to stopping them from lifting the Premier League title in many ways.
Well, you can. And you can also say that we stopped them from winning the treble by knocking
Yeah.
them out the League Cup. So they were going to be a little agitated by that, I think, and a little bit annoyed about that. And you can tell by the reaction of Pep on the touchline, which was just beneath me in the press box, when Bob scored in the 91st minute. I thought he was going to take off and fly over the Tyne and way down to Manchester. He leapt so far in the air, and that's what it meant to them. But you know what? That's why they're winners, mate. That's why they win the Premier League title 4 successive seasons. That's why they win the Premier League 6 seasons out of 7. That's why they win the Champions League. It's what we want to become. They're winners. They've won everything, and yet when they win one match at Newcastle 3-2, Pep is delirious. And he's got more medals. He'd have to have a neck like a giraffe to put them all around his neck. He's got so many with Man City. So that's why they're winners. That's why they care so much. Bob, the little lad, went on 91 minutes, was it? And he took the ball away. That's why they're winners, and that's what we want to be, what they are.
Yeah, it was a lovely finish from him. And the man who changed the game was Kevin De Bruyne. And we talk about the difference between being Premier League title challengers, Premier League winners, and where Newcastle are. It's all about the squad depth, isn't it, John? It's all about the talent. And I know Kevin De
Absolutely.
Bruyne had been injured, so he was coming back to fitness. So that's why he was on the bench, but he was introduced, comes on, sets up, I think sets up both of them, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Tremendous player. And when you've got a player like that to turn to, that's the difference, isn't it?
It is, but you see, as well, even if you widen it up a little bit further, one of the reasons Manchester City are successful is you're talking about squads and all that, is that when De Bruyne runs into this injury problem, which he did do, and you look at his birth certificate, which says he's far from being finished, but he is on the say on the wrong side of 30, etc. Oh dear me, what happens? He gets injured, he goes out the team, which you rightly say is why he was on the bench. But Phil Foden takes over in that position and just runs the team and almost takes it to a new level despite De Bruyne being round. He's won Player of the Year, deservedly so. He's not an out and out striker, and he scored 27 goals, has he, this season? He is phenomenal. A young lad, one of their own from Stockport to Man City, one of their own, not one of the imported players, an absolute genius. And by the way, we saw him coming. You know, it's no surprise this season. We've seen Phil Foden coming and developing. It's been absolutely inevitable. And that's what City have got. And that's what you do have once you've been around for a while. I mean, they've been building up to this for what, 9 years, 10 years. You know, we are in our second season of it. They've been going 9 or 10 years of it. Mind you, they haven't wasted a day. They haven't wasted an hour in building up to what they have now. And what they have now is quite phenomenal. I mean, you know, it's very, yes, you look at Liverpool, and yes, you look at Arsenal, but it's very, very difficult to bet against Man City doing exactly the same next season. I mean, you know, that is how much they have built the club up because they can get rid of quality players and some more come along. You know, Aguero, the greatest centre forward in the history of them, until Haaland comes along. De Bruyne, the best midfield player, until Foden comes along. You've had David Silva and Bernardo Silva. You've had Mahrez, one of the great wingers, and then all of a sudden you get Grealish, and then you get Doka. They've just continue on and on and on and on, and that's the cleverness. They don't build on one player, and once he goes slightly over the hill, the club goes slightly over the hill with him. They've got it perfectly. They're the role model for what please eventually our club becomes.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Excuse me. I'm having a bit of a mare here because I said Kevin De Bruyne got both assists. He didn't get both assists. He got one and he scored the other. So you can clearly see and hear that this game was right at the forefront of my memory. So a few corrections there that I've had to make. I do remember, though, watching Kevin De Bruyne, and when you watch the highlights back, you look at him for the goal he scored, and you look at him for the pass that he played over to Bob, and you just think, why on earth have you allowed Kevin De Bruyne that much time and space? Because you know what he can do. You shouldn't be allowing anybody that much time and space in the middle of the park, let alone Kevin De Bruyne, probably the best in the business. And it is, again, it's something that ran particularly through the second half of the season where the midfield was just non-existent, but particularly in this game against one of the best players in the world, my mind was just absolutely blown. I was so frustrated watching him have the freedom of the park.
But you know what, Andrew, as well. You know, if you look at the other side of the coin, and this is not excusing Newcastle United that day whatsoever, but you know, if you look at the other side of the coin, real quality players, and I've watched them from all over the world in the World Cups, the great Brazilians, etc., the greatest players in the world, Cruyff, Maradona, all. You know what the secret is? They always have space because you know what? They just drift. You almost don't see them go, but they just pull off so slightly into dropping into a space, and you don't know that they've actually done it. And then when you look round, they've gone. Where was he? He was standing there a second ago. Now he's not. He's just faded and then took up space. And then he becomes a magnet for his own teammates in that space. So often it is not the naive, enthusiastic player of Newcastle United losing his man. His man's too clever for him between the ears and has just drifted and pulled off the shoulder and disappeared into a pocket of space, and they find him and then he punishes them. They're clever. The world-class players stand apart from your good players. Your good Premier League players aren't world-class. Your world-class players can make the good Premier League players look average players because they just drift off. They find space. They don't make a fuss about finding it. They don't go charging across the field with arm up shouting the air for the pass so somebody can go with them. They just drop and disappear into space, pick up the ball and torture you. That's what they do. And the great players in the world have always done that and will continue to do that.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying. And in time, Newcastle will hopefully have those players. I've got some of them that can do that. Hopefully, they can have a team of them. Next up is the Aston Villa game away at Villa Park. A really important win for Newcastle United. An unexpected win.
Incredible win.
So, go on, John.
That's an absolutely incredible win because I was fearing the worst.
Yeah, we were. I remember doing the match preview and thinking, goodness me, how many goals will Newcastle United lose this by? They'd had a run of 4 consecutive defeats. Aston Villa at home, I think, had picked up 28 points from a possible 30. So, on paper, there was only one winner coming into this game. Newcastle still ravaged by injury. And yet Newcastle United scored 3, could have had a few more, won the game 3-1. Really important victory.
I mean, when you look back, when you look at the overall season, Andrew, the first thing we've both said repeatedly, time and time again, is that Newcastle lose far too many games away from home. They lost 11 in the Premier League away from home. And that's why we finished 7th, which is honourable, but it wasn't 6, 5 or 4, which it could have been if we'd had a decent sort of away form, but we didn't. Now, having said that, do you realise that in this period, Andrew, we won 3 away games on the trot? We won 3-0 at Sunderland. We won 2-0 again in the FA Cup with Fulham, and we won 3-1 with Villa. We won 3 away games on the trot, and we can't do anything away apart from getting smacked. It was absolutely incredible. We go to Villa, we win 3-1. The centre-half scores 2 of them, Shaw, which, again, you look at it. And Aston Villa qualify for the Champions League in our position of 4th, qualify for the Champions League. We beat them home and away with an aggregate score of 8 goals to us and 2 goals to them. Now, that's absolutely good. When you consider that we play Luton and we get 1 point out of 6, a draw and a defeat. And we play Forest at home and lose. We play Bournemouth and get 1 point out of 6 in the league. You look at those results, and then you look at us doing a double over Villa with a scoreline of 8-2 on aggregate. I mean, it's quite stupendous. I mean, that is the double of the season from our point of view by a million miles. And that's why when I was tinkering around with my top 10 matches of the season, from our point of view, both Aston Villa games are in my top 10 matches of the season. The 5-1 and the 3-1. I mean, that result was absolutely outstanding at a time when we needed it to be, because we weren't going well at all in the league. And as you rightly pointed out, they'd taken 28 points out of 30 at home. They were all about the home form, which was even better than ours. And yet we cuffed them. Amazing.
Yeah, a fantastic result there. We finish the month without any signings in the January transfer window, largely because of the financial restrictions, and Newcastle, for obvious reasons, trying to stick as close to the rules as possible to avoid a possible points deduction somewhere down the line. Disappointing, John, but Darren Eales had kind of already set the stall out when he met the press and spoke about the what can happen and what might happen and what Newcastle probably will be able to do. And I don't think anyone was too surprised at the lack of signings. I think there was a disappointment, but I don't think anyone was too surprised that no one came in, because people understand the financial restrictions Newcastle have to work within.
I think that's true. But you can't help but be disappointed. The fan part of me was disappointed. The professional part of me thoroughly understood. But, I think the trouble is the first windows we had under the new regime were wonderful, weren't they? We were working under restrictions then, but we had more wiggle room with the restrictions. And then we went about buying sensationally with Trippier, with Botman, with Bruno, with Isaac, with Gordon, as it turned out. And even though I was unimpressed at the time with Livramento and even Hall, do you think we'd be saying that at the end of this season, that we're impressed with the signing of Hall, when for 3/4 of this season we saw more of Lord Lucan than Shergar? So it was amazing. But that's true. But nonetheless, unlike you, I wasn't impressed by the window a year ago, because we didn't address the immediate problems. We got clever to address the future problems by signing 2 quality kid fullbacks, but they weren't totally necessary at the time. Like a centre forward was necessary, a centre half was necessary, a number 6 was necessary. So I was disappointed with the window last summer, and I was disappointed in the window in January. We can't afford to make it a hat trick, Andrew. This transfer window has got to be good. And the early indications are it's going to be, but this transfer window's got to be good.
Yeah, I agree with you, John. Into February we go then, and it was a very disappointing month, I felt, for Newcastle United. 2 very winnable home games, and
it was shocking,
2 points.
Andrew, wasn't it? It was shocking, February.
Yeah, Luton Town, the visitors to St James's Park, first off on the 3rd of February, and Barnes rescues a point, but Luton should have won it at the death. One of their players forced a fantastic save from Martin Dubravka in the 89th minute. And again, Ross Barkley having the freedom of the pitch. And it was an embarrassment of a performance, really, by Newcastle United. And they were very lucky, I felt, to get a point.
4-2 down to Luton, who we always felt would go down. They got a lot of kudos and a lot of bump for being brave and going about the game the right way. And because they were little Luton, coming up into Premier League. I remember years ago being Malcolm MacDonald's guest and going over to watch Luton, his old club, play Gateshead in the conference. And because the board wanted Malcolm to be their guest of honour, because it was on Tyneside and he was their great player. So he could take a friend, and he took me, ironically, who used to own Gateshead, watching them play Gateshead. But that was where they were. I was watching them play Gateshead in the league. And then all of a sudden, I'm watching them play Newcastle in the league, with about 4 or 5 divisions between one and the other. And to sit there, and I was sitting next to Malcolm, And it was a peculiar day for him because Luton's his ex-club and Newcastle's ex-club. We're playing at home. We're 4-2 down to Luton. And Bonds rescues us, so we get a 4-4. We let 4 goals in at St James's Park against Luton. I'm sorry, that's a bad result, and that's unacceptable. And a point is nowhere near good enough. And, there was more damage to come at home because the next home game, and yes, we went to Forest and won, but the next home game, we failed to beat Bournemouth, who had a good end to the season, but this was just the start of it. They weren't a quality side when they got a 2-2 up here. I know we won it at Forest in between 3-2, and my Jove, we needed that result. But, we said that Newcastle would not be 7th top finishers with the possibility of Europe, but for our home record. But then you look at February and see us have a 4-4 with Luton and be held 2-2 by Bournemouth, having lost at home to Forest 3-1. That was the one period where our home record temporarily was shocking.
Yeah. Again, I can't argue with anything that you're saying. I mean, I just remember watching that game and just thinking, for the love of God, someone just pick Ross Barkley up. It was one of them performances again where you're thinking, is it that simple? Like, am I looking at this and I'm thinking it from a too simplistic point of view? Just pick up the man in the middle. Don't allow the talented man to roam. Dan Burn having a difficult time against the Luton's right winger, who's one of the fastest in the Premier League. I couldn't quite understand why they'd been pitted up against one another, but they were. But they went to Forest, as you've mentioned there, picked up an important 3-2 victory, really important that one, John. And then back to St James's Park against Bournemouth, and another disappointing game at St James's Park again. And Richie having to equalise in the last minute.
92 minutes, and Richie equalises. Otherwise, we lose at home to Bournemouth and we lose at home to Luton when we were 4-2 down. And Richie come on, and remember, he had one effort where he failed to score and ought to have scored, and the ball come back, and then he managed to tuck it in. I mean, that was his. I mean, you look, that was his moment of magic this season before he might be saying goodbye. And Dummett had his moment of magic when he played centre half and against Man U, etc., etc. He had a moment of madness after that, of course, which we all know about. But these were fleeting moments for them. But to almost lose at home to Luton and almost home to Bournemouth, and we had Richie scored in 92 minutes. That was a shaker because we weren't good away from home, and all of a sudden, temporarily, thankfully, we weren't good at home.
Yeah. And then they travel down to Arsenal and get beat 4-1. No complaints about that. I mean, Arsenal thoroughly deserved it. It was a very dominating display from Arsenal. So yeah, a disappointing month really for Newcastle there, especially in the league. We'll head in to March, and we are going to discuss that draw against Everton that we've alluded to quite a few times in this episode already. But we'll start with that performance against Wolves at home. It was a game that I was fearing. I think Wolves have come on leaps and bounds under Gary O'Neill. But Eddie Howe flicked the switch. It was the perfect kind of tactical display. It was kind of the tactical setup that we've been longing for weeks, for months, and the space between the midfield and the defence disappeared because the instruction was given to sit deep. The midfield were told to sit deep, absorb, and then hit on the counter, and it's exactly what they did. Scored 3. It was a tremendous result, a tremendous performance from Newcastle.
It was, and the first 2 goals were scored by our best 2 players of the season, in my opinion, Isak and Gordon. And we haven't talked too much about Anthony Gordon this season. We have talked about Isak and his 25 goals. Anthony Gordon's been absolutely sensational. He has been absolutely sensational because he came with a reputation of being a scouse scally who wasn't liked by any fans away from home. because he had this aggression and niggly aggression about him, and it was just didn't endear himself to neutrals, and he came with that reputation. He had a poor first half of the season with us, simply because he wasn't up to the physicality of our game and the high pressing and the fitness levels demanded. But he buckled down with the under 23, under 21s during the summer and was being brilliant all season. His assists have been tremendous. His amount of goals, he never scored in one season with us. This season, he scored more than he scored in the whole of his Everton career. And that's how good he's been, and deservedly is going to the Euros with England as a consequence. So against Wolves, our best two players for me, because I voted for Anthony Gordon as Player of the Year, and he's at 25, never done some Shearer. And then what I loved was, because we did do it on the counter, as you have already mentioned, and then right at the death, 92 minutes, little Tino, I think he come on as a sub, didn't he? Livramento, and he runs almost from the edge of his own box into their box, dribbling past all sorts of people. I thought when he got in their box, he'd actually lost the ball between his 2 feet. It sort of bobbled and he fell over, but somehow managed to toe poke it in the net for his first Newcastle goal. Terrific. Well done, the lad. Thoroughly deserved. You'd come into Newcastle to be an understudy to Trippier. You'd played left back and played it wonderfully well, proved that what a 2-footer player you are, and you played right back and played it wonderfully well. Deserved the goal, great impact, meant as a cover right back and a cover left back. To me, became instantly a first teamer, and next season has to be a starter.
No, I agree. I think he's going to be the first choice right back. If only he can just get over these little injury niggles that he has, I think he's got a fantastic future ahead of him. Now, they go down to Stamford Bridge and they lose 3-2 to a Chelsea side who were in horrendous form at the time. And it was a game that you really looked at and thought, Newcastle, given the fact of just comprehensively beating Wolves, they should give a good account of themselves at Stamford Bridge. And then the way they're set up was just a little bit strange. And it's one of those memories I have of the season where I've never heard a commentator, because it was live on Sky, I've never heard a commentator, I've never heard the guests in the studio, and I've never seen on social media the fans all saying the same thing. Why didn't Newcastle set up in the same fashion against Chelsea that they did against Wolves? Why didn't they sit deep? Because Chelsea have struggled this season against teams who sit deep and frustrate them. And Newcastle just, for whatever reason, decided not to do that. And Chelsea ran out 3-2 winners.
I mean, it was quite amazing because they did it in the reverse way to what they would normally do. If they sit deep at all and it's not Eddie Howe's way, it would be away from home. They sat deep at home to Wolves, which was very courageous to do in front of 50,000 Geordies, but it worked a treat because they hit them on the break and we won 3-0 and all the fans were absolutely delighted. Now, you think then you've got a blueprint for success. You go down to Chelsea and you go gung home and you go charging at them with our defensive record, and we let in 3. That didn't make sense tactically whatsoever. It just didn't make sense whatsoever, and it was particularly annoying because we'd hammered Chelsea up here by 4 goals, and we got very annoyed about the way we went out of the League Cup down at their place. So they then annoy you again, but we give it to them in the League Cup. And to be truthful, our tactics handed the initiative to them in this game.
And I mean, you look back at the game, Newcastle took 43 minutes to get a shot on target. Anthony Gordon had to come off as well with injury. It just wasn't a very good night at all down at Stamford Bridge. And again, just kind of re-emphasises this away form that Eddie Howe has to find the remedy to over the summer. And it was, Newcastle were looking to complete a league double for the first time over Chelsea since 86-87, but it was just the performance just was lacking, and it was really disappointing. I mean, Gordon came off in the 34th minute, which didn't help at all. You had Dan Burn landing awkwardly; he was substituted, and Newcastle were already without Kieran Trippier, Callum Wilson, Joelinton, and of course Nick Pope. And probably the only real quality moment was a great strike from Jacob Murphy, but it didn't matter in the end, and Chelsea won 3-2. They came and went back to St James's Park and they beat West Ham 4-3. And I think for many people, John, this game was probably the turning point because they were 3-1 down within 48 minutes. They scored 3 goals in 13 minutes, a double from Harvey Barnes to get the win. West Ham were above them in the league at this point, so Newcastle really needed to win this. The form has been very hit and miss, picked up wins here and there, but there's no consistency. To find yourself down 3-1 after 48 minutes, you've got to have some character, some strength to get yourself back into a winning position.
And some stupidity if you go down 3-1 in the first place. Which, as far as I was concerned, remember this match, as you said, was such a must-win because not only had we gone down to Chelsea and blew it tactically, but we predictably went out of the FA Cup to Manchester City 2-0 before we played West Ham. That was predictable. We'll give them that result because they can do us a favour on Saturday in the Cup final by making certain we go into Europe next season. So we'll let them have that one because we also knocked them out the League Cup. But, and as you say, West Ham were above us. They're a crazy side. They were going for a European place through the league, and yet there was constant talk that Moyes was facing the sack. They had a funny old season. There were 2 outsiders. They were batting against their weight. They were fighting, punching above their weight, but yet, you know, all the time there was this undercurrent that Moyes wasn't going to last, which of course he didn't in the end. But they went 3-1 up here, and Moyes didn't help himself. He went 3-1 up here, and he took Antonio off. Remember, centre forward, and put on a midfielder or whatever. His tactical substitutions boomeranged horrendously on him. It's one of my great memories of the season, beating West Ham 4-3, only because of the fight back. It was one of my great agonies of the season at 1-3, but to be 3-1 down and then win 4-3, you know, reminded me a bit of Arsenal 4-4 and Czech Tiote up here and all that sort of business. We scored 3 goals in 13 minutes. It was terrific for us. Isak got two so many times in the league this last year and never got a hat-trick. I mean, he must have had 4 or 5 2-goal returns in matches, but never completed for a hat-trick. Sometimes because he was subbed, of course. But then Barnes gets 2 in 83 and 90 minutes, and we've won 4-3. It was relief, but it's elation, isn't it? You know, when I say elation, I was absolutely furious at Newcastle 1, West Ham 3, because we were a disgrace, and then we win it. So that's how fickle football is. And it turns out to be one of the memories of the season because of the fight back and in front of all the home crowd who are suddenly, after being in despair, going blinking crackers because they're seeing the team roar back with 3 goals in less than a quarter of an hour.
Yeah, it was a tremendous performance from Harvey Barnes, and the second goal in particular was really nice. It just does Calvin Phillips and drives it home. And obviously, Calvin Phillips has been strongly linked to Newcastle in the January, went to West Ham, and you know, it was probably a little bit of a reminder of the lucky escape it had because we hadn't even really started many games for West Ham since moving there on loan. He comes off the bench here with West Ham in a dominant position and is at fault for concedes the penalty that gets Newcastle, I think, back to 3-2, and then he's done by Barnes for the second goal. It was a poor cameo from Calvin Phillips, wasn't it?
He's been awful since he left Man City. I mean, there was a lot of talk about us getting him as the number 6. I was a great advocate of us needing a number 6. I'm still of that opinion, unless Tonali turns out to be the number 6 we need. If Eddie Howe decides to play him there rather than 8. But Calvin Phillips, he had been out of the. You can't switch on football like a tap. You can't just go over and turn a tap on, there's the water. You can't turn displays on like that. Everything he had done at Leeds United that made him an England player and made him much wanted and made him get courted by Manchester City, sitting on the bench at Manchester City just eroded him. And when he got picked in England sides, he looked exactly that. Gareth Southgate was far too loyal to him. I desperately didn't want us to sign him because, unfortunately, what he showed at West Ham is what I was expecting him to show, because he'd been out of the whole thing for far too long. And you can't take your foot off the accelerator and then just suddenly put it back on when you want to. It doesn't work like that. And he was awful. He really was awful, and he's continued to be awful. And it's cost him his England place in the Euros, of course it has. But hey, football's a harsh old world. That's why you get paid a lot of money to play it.
Certainly so, and we're very happy that Newcastle managed to take advantage of Calvin Phillips' poor performance. Next up, John, is that game against Everton, 1-1. And I think for many people, this will be the most frustrating game of the entire season, because Newcastle were ahead. They were a few minutes away from a very important victory. They were in relative control. I don't think Everton had threatened at all. I think maybe they'd hit the post once, perhaps, but Newcastle were on top of the game. Paul Dummett is introduced, and he just brings down the Everton player in the box. No qualms about it. It's a penalty. He's basically buried him to the floor. Dominic Calvert-Lewin, who hadn't scored in something like, I'm not even going to try and guess the number of games, but it was a long time.
It was double figures. It was double-figure games without a goal.
He steps up, puts the penalty home, and you just leave the stadium thinking, what on earth was that all about? And it goes back to what you were just saying slightly, John, about Calvin Phillips. You can't just switch it on.
No,
you can't.
No, you can't. No, you can't.
And the same applies to the likes of Paul Dummett and Matt Ritchie. It's probably a little bit easier for an attacker maybe to have that moment where it does come back. But as a defender, you've got to be switched on all the time. And for Paul Dummett to get thrown into that game against some tricky midfielders and forwards, maybe it was inevitable what happened.
He come on as a left back, which is what he spent all his career as a left back. And if you watch it, because I watched it back through gritted teeth and fingers when I got home, because I watched it back and it was a free kick played into the box. And if you watch Dummett go with his opponent, he never looks at the ball. He looks at the opponent all the time and grapples him to the ground. I mean, there was a dispute. Is it a penalty? Is it not? Naturally, Eddie and Paul take up it wasn't line. Of course it was. There was 2 minutes to go. It was 88 minutes. Now, two things struck me out of that match. One was, what on earth Dummett doing, and is this the end of his Newcastle United career? And it's been long and quite distinguished, and he's been an honourable player for us. But, as he signed out in the worst way that's possible. And the other isn't it ironic at a time when we're such wonderful goal scorers and we score 85 goals in the Premier League, in that particular match, which we have been in control of it, we were only 1-0 up. So one mistake we weren't 3 up or 4 up, which we were in loads of other games where it would have been a consolation. This took 2 points away from us. And when you get frustrated and you look at where we might have been in the league, and you see Everton 1-1 having lost 3-0 at their place, you see Luton 4-4 and lose 1-0 down there, you see Bournemouth never beat them in 2 games, you think what might have been, where could we have been, not just if we hadn't had the injuries, but if we'd been a bit more streetwise and a bit better defensively in the games we've just talked about. And that was that was a really a disappointing. As I must say, later on, drawn with the same scoreline, 1-1 against Brighton up here was a disappointment to me.
It,
In
it's
both cases, there were 2 points lost.
Yeah, it certainly was, and especially at home as well. When Newcastle's such a force, you shouldn't be losing points, dropping points to teams like that. Especially Everton, were on their longest winless run. I think it was like 22 games. I mean, it was a terrible run they won, and yet Newcastle just they couldn't get that all important second goal. Very disappointing. They go down to Craven Cottage next, John. They win 1-0. Awful performance, but the result is what matters. They then come back up to St James's Park and put in arguably the performance of the season against Tottenham Hotspur and win 4-0.
Oh, unbelievable, because when we were saying West Ham, when they came up here and we won 4-3, we're going for a European place, albeit one of the minor European places. Spurs were going for the top four when they came up here, were on a roll. It was Big Ange with his supersonic forward play, attacking football. And we done them four and absolutely destroyed them. I mean, we really did. Two for Isaac, one for Gordon, one for Shaw, and they're our best three players of the season with Bruno. They're our best four. And I mean, as good as we were, and we were sensational on the day, what do you make of Spurs with the high line? I mean, when you look at the front Newcastle players, the front three of Newcastle, they're all Usain Bolts. The whole three of them are like Usain Bolt. They've got so much pace, and you've got people that can drop a 60-yard pass on a sixpence. That's an old pence, of course, which you might know about, Andrew. Drop a ball on a sixpence like Bruno can and like Shaw can, dropping it over the top and letting them accelerate onto it with a back four. They had the guy, what do they call him, Vander, whoever he is, the centre half, who's said to be the quickest centre half in the Premier League. He spent all his time playing on his backside. I mean, I've never seen a more embarrassing display than his that particular day. And we, with their high line, which Ange always persists with and has got done repeatedly with, it's okay when it comes off and they're dominating everything, but it's inviting trouble against pace. And we are knee deep in pace. You know, we haven't got Chris Wood anymore. We haven't got one pacers. We've got lightning quick guys. So you play a high line against us. We just took advantage and ripped them to pieces.
A tremendous performance, tactically spot on from Eddie Howe, and Spurs just couldn't handle the energy of Newcastle United, and it was a much needed win, a fantastic outing by everyone involved. I do think, I mean, April, John, they picked up 3 victories in April. They lost to Palace, who was next up on the calendar, and drew to Everton, as we've mentioned. I think in many ways, April kind of sums up Newcastle's season. Very inconsistent, because you expect them to beat Everton, poor against Fulham, but they pick up the win. They thrash Tottenham, and they go to Crystal Palace, who've got nothing to really play for. They've just secured their own safety. The manager who replaced Roy Hodgson still trying to find his feet, and they're just blown away by Palace. Deservedly beaten. And then the next game, they beat Sheffield United 5-1. It was, it just sums up Newcastle's up and down season. But I mean, the performance of Palace, no complaints from me about the end result.
No, it does reflect Newcastle's trampoline season, up and down, up and down, up and down. The intriguing thing, you went to Palace, and I was saying before the game, like you just said there, they've got nothing to play for, etc., etc. Well, lucky you finished second in a 2-horse race down there. And you know what? Their front three, the Elise and Mateta, the French centre forward, their front three are terrific, I mean, you know what? Here's a little thought for you. Season before last, we finished 4th, out of the blue, getting the Champions League. Rest of the country never expecting it. This season just ended, out of the blue. Aston Villa finished fourth, going the Champions League. They're supposed to be a mid-table club, the same as we are. So there's been two huge surprises at fourth. If there was going to be a surprise next season, it could be Crystal Palace, you know. If they can hold their front three, if of Mateta and the two guys that play out on the wide on the wings, and by the way, they'll have a heck of a job to keep them all, because I think the Sharks are circulating for the two wide guys, and if they'll just be an average Crystal Palace side all over again if they don't. But this new manager's transformed them from what Houghton had them doing. Hodgson, sorry. There's no question of that. And if they could hold on to them, and you look at Wharton, who's suddenly in the England side, and you look at Anderson, the centre half, who we have been looking at in the past, if they kept all them and brought in a couple of more, they could be, I'm forecasting now, they could be the surprise next season. They have finished brilliantly strong and have swept sides away at the end of the season. What was wrong was that two wide players, then up until they played us, it was the first time both the wide players had started for Palace in yonks. One of them was being injured all season. From our game onwards, they started, I think, virtually every time. And they look transformed. If we have a good front three, they've got an equally good front three. Whether they can hold on to them, and you know why? That's why you've got Dougie Friedman to stay instead of coming here. He found the two wide kids that ripped us apart, and that is why they're sort of saying, you found them, you found the other guys. Do you realise you don't have to go to Newcastle? This is what Palace are saying. Palace will never be a club as big as Newcastle, but they can sell it. You realise we can do as well as Newcastle next season. That will be their dream. For it to come to fruition, they've got to keep their front three intact, which means seeing off the big money guys, and they've got to keep them fit. They didn't keep the right players fit. But believe you me, that is a quality side in the making if they can add to it, and there's going to be any shocks. No, they mightn't make four, but I tell you what, they could make Europe.
Quite the claim. I mean, funny enough, John, the three wide players, obviously, I mean, the players you're talking about there, Mateta up front, Eze, and Olise. And Olise actually, Olise was actually on the bench until the 70th.
Yes, he was against us and come on, I think, wasn't he?
Yeah, which shows you just how well they actually performed. That they didn't arguably need their best player, but Eze was absolutely brilliant that day. And I remember speaking to a Palace podcast and saying, how do you keep Eze quiet? And he said, well, he needs time and he needs space on the ball. So do not give him that. Otherwise, he'll punish you. And we discussed this because we did a review of the game the morning after. And I remember being absolutely fizzing at the way they conceded the goals, because the same old mistake of Newcastle's midfield, standing off, allowing star players time and space to control the game, happened again. And Eze was given, like Barkley in the two games against Luton, just given the license to roam, and Eze made Newcastle United pay. And it was an embarrassment, really, in many ways, their efforts to stop him.
Eze and Olise, by the way, Andrew, just to finish off on Palace, Eze and Olise remind me a bit. Remember when they had Wilfried Zaha, and he was well above Palace class, and he kept Palace afloat season after season after season because they hadn't good players around him. The difficulty here is, and Olise was on the bench against us and come off, but that was only because he'd been injured for an ages, which I was talking to you about. I think he'd started the previous game and they felt he couldn't play two as quickly as the games came round, so they benched him and brought him on. But after us, he continued to play regularly with Eze and with Mateta, who's continued to score goals at centre forward, by the way. His return has been terrific. Now, can they keep all three? They could lose both our wide players to the big clubs because the big clubs are circulating. And can they keep them fit and have they got enough backup? Probably not. But hey, I tell you what, it's going to be interesting. And you then went on and said, and it brings up our seesaw season, that having sort of done so well against Spurs and then awful at Palace, we'll come and beat Sheffield United 5-1 up here, seesaw, up and down, up and down. But I tell you what, if you think back to that game, they took the lead and was only 1-1 at half time. And I'm going to say something right now. Even on that day, Sheffield United are the worst side I've seen in the Premier League all season. We beat them 8-0 down there. And I was sitting with Supermark and I said to him at half time, we just equalised and we went in 1-1 at half time. And I said, hey, we have been an absolute disgrace. But don't worry about it. They've had all that play and haven't been able to score. And you know why? The record tells you they're not able to score. They don't score goals. They never scored goals all season. I said, they'll run out of puff now. We will destroy them in the second half. And we did destroy them in the second half. But first off, we were poor against the poorest side in the league.
Yeah,
and
they
were
could
the
have gone in
poorest
that
side in
game.
the league, Andrew. They were the poorest side in the league.
They were awful. I mean, one of the poorest sides probably the league's ever had. They could have gone
Absolutely.
into that. Yeah, they could have gone into that interval 3-1 up, really. I mean, they had the chances to add.
Apart from the fact they never do that, because they miss their chances. That's what they do. They miss
I mean, from a Newcastle point of view, John, I think, it just points to the issues Eddie Howe has to solve, because, the team allowed an awful Sheffield United side to create far too much. And it was only because Sheffield United weren't clinical enough that they didn't have a bigger lead going into that, or the lead going into half time. But as you said, Newcastle come back and end up winning 5-1 to round the month off. And they'd only lost 2 in 8 since that West Ham victory the month prior. So that is probably the turning point of the season for many people, the victory over West Ham. We head into May. You go down to Burnley. Another very slow start. Again, Newcastle fortunate that the opposition don't take their chances. I think it took about 15 minutes before Newcastle finally woke up. But they won 4-1. Callum Wilson on the score sheet. A very important victory away from home, that one.
Oh, massively so. Because honestly, we were at the stage and we were doing podcasts, previewing games and that. And we got to the stage where we're looking at each other and saying, we don't know what to forecast here, because which Newcastle's going to turn up? Is it going to be the quality Newcastle that scores 85 goals in a full season? Or is it going to be the Newcastle that leaks goals for fun? You don't know which side's going to turn up. And luckily, and often, by the way, if you recall, both sides turned up in the one game. We started games badly and then we came away and got results, as we did with Sheffield United, 1-1 at half time, win 5-1. Repeatedly, we started games poorly and then came away and won it. That was absolutely critical to us that we did beat Burnley. And in the end, it looked comprehensive and we were sending them down virtually. We officially sent Sheffield United down. They were relegated with that defeat here. And while Burnley weren't, they was near as damn it relegated by losing to us. They had a win against us to have any chance of staying up, and they got tongued 4-1. Mind you, in this funny old world of football, that gets you a job as manager of Bayern Munich, evidently.
Yeah, very, very strange, that news that Vincent Kompany is set to take over at Bayern Munich. Not really sure how he's earned that, given the way Burnley played this season and inevitably went down to the Championship. But that result for Newcastle, John, it set me up for what I hoped was going to be a very positive and fun end to the season. But Newcastle being Newcastle United, they don't like to do too many nice things to you. And the next game up was Brighton at home, the last home game of the season. Brighton with nothing to play for. And yet Newcastle United just did not seize the opportunity. I mean, they seized that opportunity. They probably end up finishing 6th. They draw 1-1. Not good enough.
No. But I mean, it was ever this, isn't it? Every time we thought we got comfortable, they did something to make us uncomfortable. And every time they made us uncomfortable and we feared the worst and falling away to 9th or 10th, they managed to rescue something. It was quite an absurd season. And that was a massive disappointment because it was the last game of the season and you want to go out with a home win on your last day. You want to take your lap of honour, which I prefer to call a lap of appreciation, because a lap of honour, when if Newcastle United really had a lap of honour, 1969 was the last one. So let's call it a lap of appreciation if the players appreciating the crowd and the crowd appreciating the players. You want to do that on the back of a win and have the feel-good factor. The trudge round the pitch, half apologetically, I felt, because they'd only drawn 1-1 at home to Brighton, and they had 2 away matches to end the season, and Europe looked as if it could be very difficult. And so it was, they almost did that must do these days, their lap of honour. I mean, crikey, we do it after losing these days at home. We did that almost apologetically with the little kids on the pitch, and that produced some feel-good factor, which was necessary because it was half embarrassing and it was a bit of a disappointment. 1-1 at home on the last day.
It was a frustration because Newcastle had won 5 of their previous 7 league games, and they'd played. Well, obviously, we're talking about them beating Sheffield United and beating Spurs at home. So you come into this game and you're thinking Newcastle are at home. They know what's at stake here. Just turn up like you did in the second halves against Sheffield United, and you'll have no bother. But in truth, Brighton will feel like they should have won the game. They got the lead, and it took Newcastle 34 minutes to for them to force a save out of the Brighton goalkeeper before Longstaff finally got the equaliser. But Newcastle United never really looked like winning the game. I know Gordon had one ruled out for offside, but
it was offside.
Yeah, Miggy was introduced to the game, wasn't he? And he was the only one that really looked like doing anything, and then he throws himself to the floor in a really frustrating manner. I think probably the one thing that stands out from that game, though, John, is Newcastle's need for another striker, because Alexander Isak was ill. He played. You could tell he wasn't himself. He comes off way earlier than anyone had expected, and then after the game, it comes out about this illness.
And it just reaffirms Wilson was ill, wasn't he, as well? Wilson was ill as well.
Yeah, he was. So he wasn't included in the squad at all. So the point being that it just reaffirms Newcastle's need to bring in a striker to really carry the load, to share the load with Isak.
Yeah, we've been banging on about that, mate, haven't we? Let's hope that somebody hears the knock on the door this summer and does something about it, because if they don't, we're flying by the seat of our pants again. And by the way, if we both thought that Brighton 1-1 was a poor way of finishing the season at home and slightly deflating an embarrassing lap of appreciation at the end of the game, worse was to follow when we went to Manchester United the next week and lost 3-2. With 2 away games to come after Brighton and Europe hanging by a thread, we were trying to convince ourselves that having beaten Manchester United twice already this season and having beaten them at the end of last season after the Carabao Cup final, that we could make it 4 wins on the trot, we could revive our European hopes, etc. And what do? We go down there with a suicide squad and lose 3-2.
Yeah, not a good performance at all. And you look at the goals that were conceded, and especially the Diallo goal, and he's just kind of on the edge of his box, and he's just on the edge of the Newcastle box, and he's just allowed to have the ball and pop it in the back of the net. There was questions over the selection. Should Joelinton have started? Should Nick Pope have started? I mean, it's not too long ago since we discussed this, and then so we'll not go over old ground.
No.
But some frustrating decisions made, I think, and some very, very disappointing performances from a Newcastle point of view against an awful Manchester United side who Newcastle should have beaten. We go into Brentford knowing that Newcastle just need to match what Manchester United do, and they'll finish above them for the first time since I think it was the mid 70s. And they did do. They beat Brentford 4-2. A very dominant first half display. Got a little bit nervous when Brentford started to find a couple of goals, but Bruno then added the 4th, and Newcastle secured 7th. It was a nice way to see out the season, John.
It was. But having said that, didn't the 90 minutes on the last day at Brentford just sum up Newcastle's season? They're 3-0 up at half time, absolutely strolling it. But then we forget our defence likes to be leaky. So all of a sudden it's 2-3. And there's a bit of a panic on because you're looking in, because if you remember, Manchester United started winning away in the one away 2-0 at Brighton, having got battered until they scored the first goal at Brighton. So all of a sudden they're winning and we are only 3-2 up, having been 3-0 up. Bruno settled the nerves. It was a good result and it was a decent display. It was a superb display first half. But it meant we secured 7th and we finished above Manchester United, which was absolutely marvellous. The previous season we'd finished above Liverpool, Chelsea and Spurs. So we've been scattering the big six. This time it was the so-called self-appointed big six. This time it was Manchester United. That was terrific. 7th is good. Is it good enough to get us in Europe? We're waiting to find out through the FA Cup. And ironically, in hindsight, in a couple of years' time or whatever, even later this summer, what happens at Wembley will determine how we view this season. If we get into Europe, we'll say that was fine under the circumstances, a 10-month ban for Tonali, injuries round the block, that many. That was another brick in the building wall. That was a success. If we don't get into Europe, we'll say we've gone from 4th top Champions League football in a Wembley Cup final to not even in Europe. That was a failure. Isn't it amazing that it's typical of this seesaw season, the way that this season will be determined is going to happen on a Saturday when a lot of players are still there coming back from Oz and we're nowhere near Wembley and we're nowhere near playing, but our future is going to be decided for us by a Manchester derby.
Yeah, I think the biggest frustration is that it was totally in Newcastle's hands. We shouldn't even be talking about this, really. We should be talking about Newcastle being 6th and waiting to see whether it's Europa League or Europa Conference, not waiting to see whether they've got any European football.
Correct.
And they've only got themselves to blame for being in this position because of points dropped against Everton, points dropped against Luton, Bournemouth, points dropped against Brighton, and points dropped against Manchester United. Of course, some memorable performances, especially through April, as we said, Sheffield United and Spurs spring to mind. Going to read some stats out, John, just to finish off. Newcastle's 85 Premier League goals, as you've mentioned, is the most scored in a top-flight campaign since 1961 when they scored 86. They have both scored and conceded in 23 different Premier League games this season for the first time since 2012-13. Eddie Howe has now won 50 Premier League games in charge of Newcastle in what is his 103rd game. Only Kevin Keegan has reached 50 top-flight wins for the club in fewer games, which was 92 games. And Alexander Isak is the first Premier League player to score at least 25 goals. Sorry, the first Newcastle player to score at least 25 goals in all competitions in a Premier League season since Alan Shearer in 2003-2004. But the away record, John, is probably the biggest issue. Is a stat that we don't really want to talk about, but we're going to have to. Lost 11, only won 6. That's not good enough. The stats I've just read out, there's some really good ones to pick from, some really good things to build upon. But if they don't get the away form correct from the off next season, then, something's gone wrong.
Oh, yes. I mean, it is as simple as that. And would we have thought when we were sitting here this time last year, at the end of the season when we were finishing 4th top, we would be saying a year on, what a poor defensive record Newcastle had. They had the best defensive record in the Premier League a year ago. It's quite amazing. And yet they've got the worst. And you know what? It's accepted that we've got a terrible record because we're going to sign 2 kids on a free transfer the minute the transfer window opens, the boy from Fulham and the boy from Bournemouth. And that tells you everything we want to know about the fact that the barn door's been swinging open on its hinges. And we can't have that. Yes, we missed Pope, but you can't put it all down to Dubravka. because that would be unfair. It was a significant difference, but we've got to get the back right. We've got to get a better defensive record next season to give us a chance. I mean, we have a team that topped 100 goals in all competitions, topped 80 goals in the Premier League, and we only finished seventh. We had a centre forward that scored 25 goals and we only finished seventh. Why? Because away from home, we were getting tucked up and we were shipping goals like Billio. And that can't continue. That has got to change. Pluses, just for a bit of fun, my player of the year, I went four players I thought were honourable mentions. Gordon won it for me. Isaac was my runner-up for me. Bruno was third and Shaw was fourth. That was my personal ones, top four players of the year.
Yeah, Anthony Gordon for me, John, and I think we need to give a special mention to Bruno for not managing to pick up a yellow card since Man City back in I think it was January, wasn't it, when he picked up that card, and he had to go a long time to avoid a 2-game ban, and then he went the entirety of the rest of the season, which is tremendous from him.
But it also makes you wonder why he picked up all those yellow cards in the first place when he can discipline himself like that.
It certainly does. It certainly does. But yeah, Gordon, my man of the match. I think I want to give just quickly a special credit to Lewis Miley, looking right at home in the centre of the park. Very excited to see what the future holds from him. And I think just excited, John, for Eddie Howe to get his full squad back, because the injuries have played a massive part. I know Eddie Howe never used it as an excuse, but it is, part of the reason Newcastle have finished so far down the table, really. I mean, it's fantastic to see them only 9 points off fourth. I mean, they were actually quite close in the end. If you look back at them results that I've mentioned before, where they've thrown points away, we could be talking about Champions League football. But I'm looking forward to the start of the season when he has everyone back, when he's got Tonali back, when he's got a full bill of health plus a few additions. Because when he gets that, the squad is looking quite decent.
Yes, it is. You've got to accept, all of us, I mean, that injuries are part and parcel of football, not the amount of injuries we've had this season and the length of time each player's been out, because that's been absurd. And some of them have been freakish. We've had 2 dislocated shoulders. We've had Dan Burn injured because he fell off the top of Gray's Monument. I think he fell such a distance onto the deck when he got his injury. Anderson, Harvey Barnes gets an injury under his toe and we don't see him again for 5 months. I mean, what's going off here? Like, it was all absolutely absurd. But injuries are a part and parcel of football. They will happen again next season. Hopefully they won't happen as often as they happened this season. And we've got to make certain that they don't. I mean, I do accept there was a lot of freakish injuries. We've just talked about 2 dislocated shoulders, about Dan Burn falling from a great height, Anderson, Harvey Barnes' toe. But we've also got to have a look at both the way we train and the way we are in the physio room to make certain we eliminate any possibilities then of players coming back too quickly, wrong decisions being made, like Bachmann, who should have been pulled out and forced to have a operation long before he did, because he was never the same player as he tried to battle on. We've got to look at every avenue possible to help us to be successful, but we ought to get a bigger run of Lady Luck next season. And Tonali, we talk about freakish injuries. I mean, is anything more freakish than what happened to Tonali? I mean, good gracious me, 10 more freakish from our point of view, not from his point of view, from our point of view. I mean, 52 million, and before he had time for the ink to dry on his contract, he was out for 10 months banned. I mean, crazy. I mean, he's got to come back and show that he's worth 52 million. And if he does show he's worth 52 million, we've got a good player on our hands. I honestly don't know yet that what level he's going to be at, apart from the fact he won the Serie A and got to a final Champions League, and he's an Italian international. He's got a wonderful pedigree, but I want to see him enthusiastic to be here, because he looked like a well-smacked backside at times last season before he went out banned. You know, he looked terribly miserable. I felt sorry for the lad until I realised that he was miserable at Newcastle, and then I didn't feel sorry for him. But we need him to produce what we know or believe that he can produce. He will be a massive plus to us before we sign other players. But yes, I mean, I prefer to sit here and look at my Geordie pot in front of me and say it's half full rather than half empty. And be much more optimistic about the future, because I spent a decade and a half under Ashley being absolutely terrified about the future. So it's nice to be optimistic. Upward and onward. Please, Man City. Pep, we love you. Haaland, you're the greatest. We cannot abide some of Grealish's, but if you want to score the winner against Manchester United, we'll love you too. Let's get into Europe, because we need to be there, because we want to be amongst the big boys all the time. So let us get there. And you know what? We've got three knockout trophies to go for next season if we're in Europe. The Europa Conference, the FA Cup and the League Cup. We're not going to win the Premier League, we know that. But why can't we win one of those three and get our first trophy since 1969? And if we get into Europe, we've got 3 chances next season. If we don't get into Europe, we've only got 2 chances. So let's keep all our options open. Let's have 3 goes at getting a silver pot, because an old age pensioner like me, I was off looking forward to a silver pot, because I've got to keep getting that photograph out of a young buck standing with the European Fairs Cup, because I've never seen the glint of silver since. So let it be next season, please.
Fingers crossed. And yes, we're praying that Man City do what everyone is expecting them to do and beat Man United in the FA Cup final. Thank you very much to John for taking us through part 2 of our season review of Newcastle's 2023-24 campaign. We hope you guys have enjoyed it. Please hit like, give a thumbs up to the video, leave us a rating and review on the audio channel. And for myself and John, we'll be back very, very soon. Enjoy the weekends and head over to chroniclelive.co.uk for all the latest Newcastle United news.